Hello and welcome to today's tutorial. My name is Joseph. Hope everyone's doing well today. So, in today's Gamemaker Studio tutorial, I'll be covering the creation of a player inventory. Now, I'm going to just give some warnings here. This is a full prototype and has bugs. And I'm going to sit down and rework it, but it's going to take me a couple of weeks. Because this is building a bit of a framework, this has given me some ideas on how to better do it, but I think you guys deserve seeing the process and how this works, especially for something like this. Big thank you to Jason, because he's the one that requested this. I'm still going to work on it. I'm just going to provide this so you guys at least can see what it potentially can look like and how the framework changes over time. This will be up on the Google Drive, and feel free to ask questions, jump on the Discord as well. Let's get into the tutorial. As always, I'm going to run the program. This thing has been giving me the shits for the past 2 weeks. This is what the inventory looks like right now. You can see I've got some indicators. If I click on an object, you can see here I get an array entry and the data on the object. And you'll see that my X and Y are actually snapping, and I'll explain how that all works. I can drag objects into my inventory, like so. If I go over another object, it highlights. Now, this is one of the bugs I've got. If you let go of this object on here, I haven't been able to get it to not let you do that. It just eats the object. But as you can see, I can click and drag objects in. I can click and drag objects out. You can see here the array entry expands as well as I add objects. Okay, how does this all work? Personal nightmares. That's how it all works. So, this is done using a lot of for loop calculations. Wrong button. I'm just trying to make it bigger for you guys. So we need to be have some level of understanding of how for loops work. But let's first get into the item. So the way this works is the item has to hand its data over to the player inventory so it understands what it has there. This is the way most inventories will operate, is basically there's a handover phase. This is how the handover phase should look, / give me some pain in the asses. So basically all I do is I embed a sprite, which is just the object sprite, so I can hand it over. I give it a player inventory array ID check. That's just to see if it checks the array to make sure it exists in there, and if it doesn't, it then fails over to another procedure in the step event here. The next step is to make sure the inventory object exists. If it does, then we can proceed. Okay, in here, this is where things get a little bit complicated. Not too bad, but a little bit. We've got our standard mouse check. I don't do anything fancy. That is literally just that stock standard mouse check I use. First important step here is I make sure that basically my holding item is -1. This here is important. So what I'm doing is this is using the object ID of this after we've checked it, extended retrieve value of value inside the object. So I'm just checking to make sure that this object holding is -1. It always resets to -1 through the protocols that I've created, so it knows that it's got an item. So we can't pick up multiple objects at once. The next step here is the same thing. I then, if this is equal to -1, I then replace that -1 with its own ID, which means now we fulfill the criteria, we can't proceed through this step anymore, which is fine because it's designed as a one-way gate. The next part, super important, when you're dealing with arrays and entries, you need to enter in 0-point data at the 0 entry, otherwise things will get weird and the array will get confused. The easiest way to do that is to reference the ID, or reference the array, and basically say entry 0, if equal to 0, enter data. I've tried many other solutions, and it's a pain in the rear to try to get around the screwy logic that it operates in. The next part is we run a dynamic check, basically, to see if it exists in the array. If it doesn't, you can see if either of these two checks flag as true, the last statement becomes false. So basically, this is just checking to make sure we do these two checks. If it remains false, we then proceed to add 1 to the end of the array, which is the same process as these, except all I'm doing is using the length array setting, because it always returns 1 longer than array, to enter the array data to the correct length. The way I would most likely do this in the long run if I was making a full-blown inventory setup is both this here and and the create I would be embedding in a script, and then all of it would be universal, so it would be the same kind of settings, and then modify those settings later, if that kind of makes sense. Because if you make a change in the deeper component here, you'll then need to go through all your objects and make that same sweeping change, so you just need to bear that in mind. Let's go to the player inventory. This is the part that gave me more of a headache. So once the object has the ID information, so you can see here I've got pretty much, this is the array setup, and this is the width and height of my inventory. Now you'll notice that it's a very specific number, 320. The reason for that is that's basically 10 entries in the array. So basically I've gone 32 times 10. That's how I've come to these two numbers. My inventory hold is -1. My inventory ID array, my inventory active ID, which means it knows if there's something in the square. This here is what I think is killing my logic when it comes to those objects getting eaten. I need to work out a way to fix that. I want to sit down and recreate the array without using this code to see if I come up with a better method. The sprite array, that's just storing the sprite. The X and Y is just the X and Y of those sprites. Okay, the next step... Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention something. I also disabled the object here. Totally forgot. I disabled the object. Sorry to interject. And basically everything you see after that click is just a sprite being drawn. It's not an actual object, so it's actually less render heavy on the system. Another reason I think it's killing my process here. So again, I'm just doing some bug searching. This is just a prototype. I wouldn't be calling it complete, and I'm going to be flagging it in the video as a prototype. Okay, let's get into some of the complicated madness. So I run a for loop. This for loop extends the full length of everything in these checks. Really important, because what I do is I reference the ID array to see what's in the system. The first component here looks at a mouse press. Am I within the X and Y of an object? And if I am within an X and Y of an object, to pick it up. Pull the ID, put it into my holding, and set its ID active to false. That's the first thing that happens. So that process, that chunk of code is responsible for, see the object. When I click in that square and drag it out, it's responsible for that retrieval. The next component here is to do with if I've got an item. So you can see if I click on that, I'm giving an item ID over. So if I've got an item ID that's equal to the item I'm holding, it will then start to manipulate that particular data. The for loop is used as the search function to basically cycle through and find whichever one I'm managing there. The next part is, this is the snapping function. So if you want to snap an object, this is how you do it in Gamemaker. This is particularly based off of the sprite size. So my sprite is 32 by 32. So my snap variance is 32 by 32. So if you need snapping code, that's it there. This chunk of code here, this first step, is responsible for placing the object in the inventory. So I'm looking at if the parameter of the mouse or basically both parameters are within that zone. Please bear in mind, it freaks out a little bit and I had to put -16. If that's not in there, what happens is if you click halfway up the item, it thinks it's outside the inventory. So you have to put -16 now, or 1/2 of the sprite. Again, this is why I want to rework this so I can actually get another view of how this works. Basically, this mouse X and Y is the same procedure. It's nothing fancy. The last part is, so if this is not fulfilled, the next step comes into play. So if it's outside the object, it puts it back in the room. So if I do a mouse release outside, we get an instance activate, and I set some parameters here for the object. So not too complicated. The last part to this is the part that is killing me when I'm working, to try to generate it in such a way that makes sense. So you can see here, I've got a for loop in a for loop in a for loop, which makes things a bit complicated because I'm doing multiple checks. So what I'm basically doing is this draws the inventory. So this first segment here draws it. So I'm just being lazy. This is a lazy way of doing it. So you can see my I and O are basically increments of 32. The next part here, which is the part that gives me a lot of trouble, is to do with I circle through the ID array and I reference the ID array, and then based on the X and Y versing the X plus I and Y plus O of the positions, gives me my next parameter to then say, is an ID not equal to item holding flash red, because the flag here changes to the second input. And then I also do a holding item is not equal to, so I do a double check there. In theory, I should be able to then put something in here that bumps it to then stops it from me release clicking, but again, like I said, something weird's going on and I can't seem to work out how to fix it. But it works, to a degree. It gives you guys an idea of how inventories work and the bit of complexity involved. This for loop is very simple. All this does is it's got two jobs. It just cycles through. It looks at what item I'm holding, and then it will draw it to my position of my mouse because it pulls its X and Y snaps. And then if I'm not holding it, so if it's got an active inventory, it will snap it to the inventory and draw it. So that's pretty much the code. This is just some guff I've drawn. So this is what you see as the array return, just so I can see what's going on. I'm going to leave it in there in the demo for you guys so you can actually still see the array inputs and that and kind of work your heads around. Like I said, this is a little bit of a complex system. I hope that tutorial made sense. I'm sorry it's not a completely debugged version. I did try for 2 weeks to debug this bastard. Did not work. So I'm going to label this as a prototype. I'm going to come back to it. I'm going to work on it over the next couple of weeks and see if I can make it a bit nicer. The next video I want to get out is a request from Zine, which is to do with some text editing stuff. So I'm hoping to have that out in the next couple of weeks. Big thank you to everyone on the channel. You guys are amazing. You have no idea. I can't believe it's already at 171 subscribers. 271 subscribers. That's a massive number in my mind. You guys are all amazing, and I will see you next time.